Welcome to the 4th episode of theSyNoShOw. And today's topics are this week's RRR featuring Sharona, Schwartz and Barbara. And last but not least, of course, the first look at the new unit's Skillsets. So Tohru, Kanna, Fafnir, Lukua and Elma. But before we get into it, I do have to tell you to be there on the 13th of January, because we are going to once again stream my polls and also do a little live analysis of all the new characters from the collab event. So be there. Link for the live stream in the description down below. Make sure to activate the reminder. And don't forget to join the community Discord, link also in the description. And if you enjoy my content a lot, maybe even think about becoming a channel member, which of course also gives you these perks in return. But enough of that. Let's get right into our first topic of the day and our first segment, news. And like I mentioned at the start, we are going to start this off with this week's RR featuring Sharona as the 6-star and Schwartz and Barbara as the 5 stars. And as usual, we are going to do this in a lightning round fashion, so let's get right into the first 5-star of this week, which is Daniel the Schwartz, who is not only the #1 dad of 2021, but also a sniper imposter, because he's actually more of a detonator with the same chain as his daughter. And yeah, he isn't really much of a sniper, as the only thing that kind of reminds of a sniper is his active skill that hits the whole field. And this is actually a quite decent skill, because it can get rid of enemies quite easily and is especially useful for hard content and co, as it does deal HP based damage similar to Michael. So this is quite useful for Elysium and Spire, and his breakthroughs make this even better, with BT2 adding the 10% HP execute, and MBT is the quite huge power spike where you get the preemptive strike, and preemptive strike is always useful. And this just makes him the perfect farmer for general content, for autoing content in general. So he's good for general content, he's good for hard content. Daniel the Schwartz is just an overall amazing character for the Thunder element. And next is Barbara, who is not only an aspiring idol of the Retizel Ranch, but also somewhat of a weird case. In the past I did talk about her, and my opinion on her was rather neutral. And I kind of was right. Back then I said that she is going to be quite useful when harder content comes that requires something like a stun. And well, who could have guessed? We now have awakened foes everywhere in the simulation mode, and generally in all new events and modes. And a stun against these enemies is quite useful. There is the problem of her very high cooldown, but you can kind of fix that by just getting some BTs, as BT2 reduces her skills cooldown by 1, and MBT gives her, similar to Schwartz, preemptive strike. So her breakthroughs are also not too bad, and she also has her own little niche now that she only shares with characters like Klecken, Faust, and also in the fire element of course with Cordy. But generally Barbara can be better as she has the field-wide stun. But obviously we can't forget that this also has a downside, because it only stuns foes guaranteed on red tiles. So you kind of have to set it up first, and unfortunately there isn't a real select tile converter for fire besides Tiny One at the moment. So Barbara's use cases are limited, but she is quite useful for those situations. So you might wanna think about picking up Barbara for now, or also to future-proof yourself for harder content. And this already brings us to our last character of this week's RR, which is the 6-star Sharona. And if you watched my water tier list video, you already know that I put her on top of the strong tier as the DPS, as basically at the moment the best gacha DPS overall in the water element, because she has that quite nice mix of utility and damage through her equipment and her teleport, which gives these stacks which increase her chain damage, which overall gives her quite nice damage potential, and her global teleport is quite handy itself, because you can't really say no to some extra utility, especially if it's that nice on a DPS character. So Sharona is quite a solid character. You don't exactly need her if you already have Regal, because Regal is the best damage dealer in the water element. He's basically the big daddy of area, and you can't really top that, damage wise that is. If you still want that utility in the form of this global teleport, and you don't wanna use Corex or don't have Corex, then you might wanna pick up Sharona. And don't forget, she is an Illumina commander, so if you're an Illumina fan, you might wanna go for her. So, to wrap this whole thing up, is this RRR worth? Should you roll? And the answer is a bit more complicated. Generally, I would say probably not. As Barbara isn't that great, Schwartz is amazing as a 5-star, and Sharona is also a quite good character, but there is one thing holding me back, and that's the possibility of Eve and Cinza coming really soon. We already went through the Galena Uriel banner, which was also the first limited banner, and the second limited banner was the Eve and Cinza one, so I do expect at least 1 or 2 more filler RRRs, but after that there's a very high chance that we are going to get Eve or Cinza. And as you know, Cinza's a really good fire DPS, so you might wanna save for him, or even think one step ahead and wait for the hero banner, which could come a couple weeks after the Eve and Cinza RR. So spending your yellow flares recklessly can be quite dumb at the moment. So, Sharona is really nice, but she isn't necessary. She's not a must-have by any means. And the same applies to basically both of the 5-stars. Schwartz is by far, I would say, the biggest highlight of this banner, so if you want Schwartz, you can risk the 50-50 on the rate up. So you have to decide yourself if you really want to commit for Schwartz, but generally I would say you can probably skip this banner. And let's now look at the thing we've all been waiting for. Which are the skill sets of the Dragon Maid collab characters. There is 5 of them, and we're going to go in release order. So we're going to start us off with this 6-star Tohru. And there's one thing I have to say, of course I did already see her skill set, so I already had some time to kind of make up my mind about what I think about it so far on paper. And one thing I have to say straight up, there's a lot of things that do need to be tested on first day. But let's just get into it. Tohru is a 6-star fire sniper. Interactive skill Fire Breath with a 3-turn CD and preemptive strike, but keep in mind this is MBT. So we can also expect that some of these things are locked behind BT3 and MBT. So, this skill deals 360% damage to 13 tiles in a diamond shape, centered on one select tile on the field and knocks back hit enemies. This is actually quite interesting. This kind of reminds me of the skills of Allura and Frostfire, basically a global nuke with a lot of damage. But in her case it does have quite the hit range, so it's actually quite a lot better, but it does have a CD of 3, and the preemptive strike I can with certainty kind of say that this should be BT3 or MBT. So this skill is decent, it's just a plain old damage skill with some added small utility, but yeah, a ranged knockback is quite interesting, especially with this amount of damage and that cooldown. But of course one of her BTs could be -1 CD, so this could probably also be a 4-turn CD skill. That's a lot of damage after all, and it hits a lot of enemies. But let's get first to the biggest part of her skill set, her chain combo. And this is basically the Luke and Sariel chain with a twist, because this has the same kind of mechanic that every time you hit the same enemy, the next damage is halved, but this also deals 30% splash damage in a volatile cross shape, so basically like the same thing Fleur and Wrath do. But on a Sariel Luke chain, on the random RNG 3 hit chain, or up to 4 hits, this is actually quite nuts, because the amount of AoE damage you can deal, we can't forget obviously that the damage always gets halved, so also the splash damage, but this is not too bad. But we can't forget that this does have kind of low scalings, and there's actually the possibility of the splash damage being a BT, because if we look at Fleur and Wrath, those two actually have more splash damage as MBT, so it takes them up from 30 to 60 I think. And in her case it would make sense that her base splash damage is only 15% and goes up to 30, so this could be MBT, which would make this chain a lot worse. And she basically doesn't have any competition, so same situation as with Luke. But there's obviously one big difference, and that's that she also can kind of compete with detonators, and that's the biggest thing we do have to test on first day, because that kind of makes or breaks her whole skill set. This could also mean that she's in general just a very good pseudo detonator as well. And last but not least, her equipment is quite simple. This basically just increases her overall chain damage, so also her normal chain damage and also her splash damage. Very similar to Luke, who also had an equipment that boosts his chain damage to kind of make up for that halving of damage every time you hit another time. But in contrast to Luke's equip, this isn't really instantly a really good equip on the first look. Because there's a lot of things we have to test, especially because every combo increases her damage, so there has to be some sort of stack system. And what does combo mean? Obviously combo means the normal attack combos, but does that mean only her attacks or the attacks of the whole team? Because that's quite important. Else this is not going to be the most useful equip, so we will have to test that. And the second 6-star of this collab event is Kanna, who is, as you can see, our newest 6-star Thunder Sniper. And at first glance we can already see that her stats aren't that great, but let's get into her skill set. Her active skill Sky Glare has a 3-turn CD with preemptive strike at MBT, keep that in mind, so basically the same as Tohru. And the skill selects one tile, deals 280% damage to all enemies along the way and adjacent tiles and knocks them back as far as possible. So basically the same as Karen. Enemies along the way will receive 1.3 times the damage. This skill looks okay, not the greatest damage, very similar to Karen I feel, just without the converting part. It's no okay detonator-like skill. And when I look at her chain combo, the first thing that directly jumps into my eye is that this is a limited sniper chain, which isn't the best, but it's actually not too bad because it starts at 170% and at that, at a free starting chain requirement, which is actually quite rare. Most snipers start at either 4 or sometimes even at 5, most of the time at 4. So having a free chain that hits 2 enemies with 170% is actually quite good. This goes up to 180% and hits 4 enemies. So this chain is, even though it's limited, kind of nice. And her equipment to wrap this whole thing up is Reign of Dragons, when all Thunder Aurorians or our Dragon Maid characters, so this is actually using a new keyword, the Dragon Maid keyword. So that means there's some synergy between these characters, so you can probably make some kind of anime-related Kobayashi's Dragon Maid rainbow theme, I guess. So when a Thunder or Dragon Maid character triggers an active skill, so this reminds me already of Tessa, Kanna gains 1 charge, up to 10 times, so yeah, Tessa-like, and every charge increases her basic attack by 3% and half the charges will be cleared after the round ends. Kanna gains 2 charges when a wave starts. So the sad part is, this would be a whole lot better if it would be every time a round starts, but wave is kind of rough because most fights only have 2 or sometimes rarely 3 waves, so yeah, and losing half of the stacks every round. Wow, that's rough. This means even if you run it her in a dedicated Tessa team, someone with Luke, all these 1-turn CD characters, you're still only gonna end up with at max like 6 or 7 stacks, and usually end up at like 2. So this is basically only gonna be like a 6% buff most of the time, which is not too great. So yeah, she looks okay. On paper okay, so let's move on to next character, which is the 5-star water detonator Alma. And I really like her, she's my most favorite character of the show. Her stats look decent, and it does seem like all of these Dragon Maid characters have a free CD skill with preemptive strike, which is probably for all of them BT free, at least I hope so. This selects 1 out of 4 directions and selects a direction on either side, attacking enemies within 90 degrees and dealing 340% damage to enemies in the area. The damage decreases during the sweep to a minimum of 40%. So this kind of reminds me of Sinza a little bit, but more of Taki to be honest. So it looks like this is a Taki situation where you select one direction and then you select one tile to kind of make an L, kind of like the L in Elma. So this is kind of like a pun skill. You basically cover a whole part of the field with an L and deal damage to it. And I assume, we don't know yet, that's actually something we do have to test on first day, that the damage gets decreased the bigger the L is. the bigger the coverage of the field is. But we will see. And I already see something that I don't like, which is her chain combo, which is a column chain. And it has quite the low scalings as well. It's a shame, but her stats are alright for 4 and 5-star, I guess. But her equipment probably makes up for it, because I can see that it increases normal attack, chain combo and active skill damage by 20% when its HP is full. So you kind of want to run her together with Philishite, together with Noah. You want to be at full HP when you want to use her as a dedicated main DPS. Which is probably not the best idea. She looks a bit subpar, to be honest. You can use her, it all depends on how well this active skill performs, to be honest. But yeah, Alma isn't that amazing either, sadly. And let's get quickly the last 2 characters out of the way. And our second last character is the actually last 5-star of this collab event, the 5-star forest support, Lukua. And she's kind of boneless OD, at least in the sense of her active skill, cause it's basically the same thing, but without poison, and instead she inflicts mortality marks, which are kind of her own thing. And if you're wondering what these do, well, her equipment explains that. These stacks basically just increase all active skill damage, and you might kind of think that that's kind of insane, and it actually is. The only problem is you do have to find the applications for that, so we will have to kind of try out some team comms with her to mind comb Paloma, Lola, obviously Mythos, basically forest characters that can spam skills. The only problem with this is she can basically only apply these marks with her active skill and her chain is the worst one in the game, so it's gonna be a bit painful to utilize her. But yeah, she has some synergy going on with active skill characters, so maybe even for rainbow teams or slotting her in teams for like Tessa and co. And to bring this episode to an end, we're gonna quickly check out the completely free 4-star Fafnir, FFF. And Fafnir is kind of becoming a meme at the moment, because the wording in his active skill describing how his conversion works is quite interesting, especially if you consider that we already have quite similar characters like Pengu and Kuma and Dana and those kind of characters. And Fafnir is seemingly very interesting in feat, especially of the ones of his enemies, and he's a pretty scuffed converter. I would say he's the most scuffed version of Bethlehem. He's a 4-star water converter, and his active skill converts 3 tiles, but basically under the enemy. At least that's what it probably means, because we didn't have this wording before, but I'm pretty sure that that's the case. And the rest of his kit is alright. He has like detonator chains, his equipment is alright as well. It can nuke whenever you use his active skill. It deals 66.6% damage. Yeah, he's a little satanist, so he would fit perfectly into the true order, to be honest. And that also triggers when other Dragon Maid characters use their active skills. So there's your option for a full rainbow Dragon Maid team if you want to do that. So he will provide some extra nukes. That could be a fun meme team comp, so we will see. Overall, I think we all can say that Fafnir, our first feat converter in the game, is at least meme tier. I wouldn't, yeah, let's just test him out in the live stream and we will see. And with that, we are done for today. Make sure to check out the live stream. A big thanks to my channel members, and we will see us tomorrow.